given that everyone suddenly stopped talking, well, we might as well kick off. So, good evening. Welcome to Birkbeck, University of London, and welcome to Business Week. It's wonderful to see you here. Business Week is our annual opportunity to showcase the work that we do at Birkbeck and to get distinguished people here to debate and present on interesting topics of the moment. You will probably know that there's a football tournament going on. It's been in some of the papers. My money's still on England, I think, as well as to win at Headingley. But it's with that as a background, the World Cup. This year, Business Week is all about, from London to Rio, the business and politics of mega sports events. So we're going to investigate on each day a different aspect of major sports events and the legacy there are of, and the business that lies behind it. Each day comprises a keynote and a panel discussion, and then on Thursday, to which you of course are all invited, there is a one-day conference. So each of our keynotes is a named lecture, and tonight is the Andrew Booth lecture. Andrew Booth was a British electrical engineer. He was a physicist and a computer scientist who led the early development of magnetic drum memory. He worked as a mathematical physicist in the X-ray team at British Rubber, and before gaining a PhD in crystallography. In 1945, he moved here to Birkbeck, where his work in the crystallography group led him to build some of the first electronic computers in the UK, including the dynamically named all-purpose electronic computer. Booth then went on to found Birkbeck's first department of what was called numerical automation. For some reason, we no longer use that name, but I rather like it, which is the forerunner of today's Department of Computer Science and Information Systems. Our keynote for tonight is Richard Ayres. Richard is the founder and CEO of 7 League, which is a digital media firm which specialises in sport. He's worked as head of digital for Manchester City Football Club and was a member of the Channel 4 coverage of the Paralympics in 2012. After the keynote, Richard will be chairing a panel debate. He is, as you will see here, delivering the Andrew Booth Memorial Lecture and discussing the impact of digital technology and social media on sport. So please welcome Richard Ayres. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you all for coming. And it's a nice, warm evening, inside and outside. And I was going to say there's the World Cup on, but actually I don't think there's any particularly important matches going on at the moment. So maybe you had nothing better to do, so thank you for coming. I think we're going to have an interesting debate because the guys on the panel are a really nice combination of different perspectives and different viewpoints. And what I'm going to try and do is throw up some suggestions, some ideas, probably a dozen anecdotes, and I have I'll try and limit those to keep them appropriate, and it should spark some ideas, some thoughts, some conversation, as well as handling 3 areas in particular that will be social media as a whole, social media in particular in the way that you can use it as a power for change and for good, and also data, and the usage of data in sport in particular as a theme. But there's some much bigger, broader issues about sort of digital technology and sport and the sports business that should make a big difference. So let me just flip over, which means do that, I think. Oops. This is the reason why we do stuff.
Sport has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire. It has the power to unite people in a way that little else does. It speaks to youth in a language they understand. Sport can create hope where once there was only despair. It is more powerful than governments in breaking down racial barriers. It laughs in the face of all types of discrimination.
I couldn't agree more. Right? And the problem is, I don't really run sport. In fact, I don't run sport at all. Mr. Mandela's quote about the power of sport is a really critical thing. And if you were here in London in 2012, you'll remember how much London changed and how, you know, real heroes were brought out. And it really inspired people to change their lives and to do things for a force of positive good. And I went to Manchester City 3.5 years ago, as a consultant for a couple of weeks to go and help them out with some of their digital problems. They were spending a load of money, and they didn't really feel it was giving them the benefit they wanted. So I went and had a look and gave them a report. And then I discovered that sport is actually a fun and interesting and fascinating industry in which there's an incredible passion and intensity around it, and frankly, a lot of progress to be made in the digital area. So the reason why I set 7 League up is because what we aim to do is basically, I can't do that for sport, but I can help sport be much, much better at communicating and engaging with its audience and its sponsors and all the bits of the rest of society. The power to transform the connections between sport. So, you know, I started hiring people, and this is our background, this is our team, and my ones are sort of the BFI and Tiscali and Top Gear, The Guardian, the BBC News, and then the rest of the team have all mix and match of other skills. And the reason why I sort of mention this is because the impact of digital technology on an industry is the same. It's the same if it's film or music or sport or, I guess, academia, although I haven't been in that field. It just has an incredible power on pretty much every bit of the business. And so every one of these, I mean, you know, I love the fact that we've got One Direction, AC/DC, and the FA all on the same slide. It's a weird combination, but the stories and the techniques, same. So then we started applying it to this lot. And, you know, you look at the site, I mean, British Shooting is the smallest of the lot. British Shooting, God bless them, is basically, I think, 2 full-time staff and 2 or 3 part-timers who help out because they can, you know. And that's a British Olympic sport, but at the same time you've got UEFA, which is a, you know, massive body with huge quantities of resources and incredible revenue generation, and their impact in, I mean, last week I was in Georgia and Armenia, and we're talking about how do we develop the game so that 14-year-olds, you know, don't get attracted to basketball, they start being pulled into football, and it makes a difference, all that stuff. So incredibly powerful. The Man City story starts with this, really. This is probably the most iconic thing that we did. This hashtag together is still being used 3 years down the line, and I suspect it'll go on being used. It came from a place where, you know, the hashtag together was 6 weeks before the end of the 2012 season, 2011-2012, and we really needed to get everybody behind the team because it was that one where it was like it was United or City, it could have been anybody, and it was right in the balance, and it was very good. So we wanted to sort of, you know, galvanize all the interest behind it. The reason why this is relevant to tonight's talk in terms of technology and transformation is because 2 reasons. First one is it took 18 months to get this organization in a place where it could accept that. A hashtag in the middle of your pitch, right before kickoff. In fact, not just accept it, but in fact everybody in the organization, all different departments, the operational guys, the security guys, everybody understanding that digital was a good thing, that it would make a positive influence on the success of the team and on the business and everything else around it. Because what we had to create was a culture of innovation, a culture of acceptance of digital, and that is the difficult thing. And it took about 18 months, but we had, by the time we got towards the end of that season, we had a small working group of guys who I thought were cool and creative and innovative and engaged with this from all different bits of the business, and actually hashtag together came from the PR guy, who just sort of came out of it out of nowhere, but because we'd been driving it in terms of organizational change, we were able to implement it, not just on here, but on the side of the bus and on the side of the stadium and on all the tickets and on the emails that went out, and it just, like, everywhere. We were able to galvanize all of it together. It was a real, you know, the whole being greater than the sum of the parts. Because lots of people come up with campaigns. Right? Coming up with a campaign's really easy, and lots of people have tried to replicate this since, but usually without having actually built the infrastructure behind it. So the other reason why this is particularly relevant is because sports bodies, particularly clubs, but sports bodies as a whole, they have a terrible tendency to do exactly what this camera is doing, which is focus on the pitch. That's what they're there for, right? Because they think, well, you know, it's all about what goes on the pitch. And so we'll pile all of our money into that. We'll pay for the players, we'll pay for the coaches, we'll pay for all the training facilities, we'll pay for the... And usually you go to them and you say, right, so I'd like to spend £500 on this new camera, which I think is going to be amazing. And, you know, and what you get is a no. Because your budgets are just totally different in terms of your understanding. So the budget for Man City, people always used to say to me, oh, well, it was easy for you, because you had Man City, you had the Abu Dhabi money behind you. Of course you could do it. The budget I had, annual budget for media for Man City, was smaller than the media budget I had when I ran a portal at an ISP 10 years before. I used to run Tiscali as an ISP. Just, like, I mean, bearing in mind this is a multi-million-pound operation back with, you know, incredible stars and all the rest of it. Tiny. Relatively to a media organisation, it's tiny. So social media. We chose to use Twitter in this particular case. We could have used Facebook, and actually the hashtag, you know, worked on Facebook as well. There is a problem with social media, and it's this. Yeah. There's a friend who says that social media is like getting a puppy for Christmas. It's wonderful, it's exciting, it's playful, give you a lot of love, and if you don't train it correctly, it will shit all over your house. Excuse my language. But, and it's fundamentally true, right? Now, what I also particularly like about this shot is that it's got a shiny bauble in there as well. And this, for me, this sort of epitomizes two of the biggest problems that you get with digital media, and any business, but particularly sport, is that they all go, oh, social media, yeah, we can do that. We've got a guy, he's 22, straight out of university. He's on Facebook. He uses WhatsApp. Great. Let's get him to do all of our social media. And you kind of think, are you slightly insane? Because this is an extremely immediate media capability to contact tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. And it's every time they tweet, it is sending a brand message. And you want to give it to the 22-year-old who's just walked into the door, because you don't think it's important enough to be able to give it. I mean, it's just sort of slightly insane. It reminds me of a guy at a sports club recently who, I asked him the fairly straightforward question. He said, oh, well, we're going to get into digital. We're going to get a new website done. Okay. So what's that going to do for you as a business? What competitive advantage is it going to give to you as a business? And he said, well, what do you mean? We've got a website? And that was it. That was as far as the thinking had gone, was, well, we need to tick that box. We need to have a website, so let's get a website. In Armenia this week, the communications director is so proud of his new website because it's better than the old website. The old website was horrible. The new website is fairly horrible. And he's delighted. You know, you just think, oh, God. Shiny baubles, by the way, are when agencies come to you and they say, we've got this great new thing, it's going to be amazing, it's going to go viral, and it's going to connect with thousands of people, and it's going to be great, and it's really cool. And then they want you to spend, you know, X thousands of pounds on it, and it doesn't actually plug into the values of the business or the goals or the KPIs or anything behind it. Man City was guilty of this beforehand. They'd done a lovely where in the world are you, plot yourself on a map, and, you know, and they had a map which, you know, showed off all the Man City fans all over the world, and they had little identities. Oh, it was all quite cool, it was quite nice. Right, didn't actually plug into a database. Couldn't actually get any data out of it and communicate with these people. That's shiny baubles. Don't do shiny baubles. So social, last summer we had a look, just because I thought it might be interesting, we had a look at the 4 events. There was these 2 weekends side by side, which was I forget which order, Wimbledon final and I think the British Grand Prix were the same weekend, and the one beforehand was the first test and the Lions win down under. And so I thought it would be interesting to have a look at how those Twitter accounts were used by the businesses behind them. I won't go into massive detail, but this is one of the pieces of learnings. The average number of tweets per day. On the left-hand side, you've got the total volume. And the big long one is Wimbledon, because Wimbledon basically nailed score updates. Every match. And so at the very beginning of the tournament, there's a hell of a lot of matches going on, and there's score updates, they're tweeting like crazy. Right? right? So big on volume. On this side, it breaks it down into what were the kinds of tweets they were doing. So the big long blue line for Wimbledon is they were doing sort of simple messages, no particular call to action, no video, no picture, just a text, a piece of information. Now, what's interesting is that little green line. That's Silverstone. Silverstone chose, because if you look at the first graph, you think, Silverstone didn't tweet very much. But if you look at the second graph, that is the number of at mentions, the number of directly talking to individuals that they did. So the vast majority of the tweets that came from Silverstone was actually them talking to people about the parking and about the trains and about the traffic jams and all that sort of stuff. And people were asking questions back and forth on which gate do I go to and all that sort of stuff. And that's all they did. That's basic. They did a few of the other little updates, but basically the vast majority of it was customer services. If you're Nationwide Bank does Twitter, and it is, I'm pretty sure, 100% customer service. They don't do brand building and all that stuff. They just deal with talking to people. It's a way of doing it. So it's not the only example of how social can have a direct impact on your business. We've been working for FIFA, and we've been working with UEFA, and so the World Cup is a big thing for us. So we got assigned to Bosnia. Bosnia's first time in the World Cup finals. It's a big moment for a nation. I think, we sort of underestimate it. We go, oh, Scotland don't make it, so what? And England make it, but we fail again, oh, so what? Right, but for Bosnia, this is a big deal because this is about establishing their identity as a nation. And they make it to the finals. This is a huge event. Everybody's incredibly focused about it. There's a lot of national pride. But the FA isn't capitalizing on it. So we start doing some work with them. And we started doing some work with them about the 24th of May, just after the beginning of the graph. And their first match was sort of about here. And bless them, their president is a youngish guy, he's in his mid-30s, and he just got behind it and said, no, I don't care all of your other responsibilities. I want you to do this right, because we can't go away and after the World Cup just say, oh, well, we didn't win the World Cup, but also we didn't make any benefit out of it at all, out of this national pride moment. We didn't get anything. So what we did is we've driven up huge levels of following, but also engagement. And they're giving the feedback. They're sort of driving a really positive effect. And one of the things Alex might talk about later on, but because I don't know the full detail of it, is in the Olympics, there was, I think, a plan to pull together all of the email addresses of people who had applied for tickets. So I applied for archery at Lord's, didn't get the tickets, but still my email's in that database somewhere. And I think the idea was to give all of those emails, to archery so that they could then do something with that database. And I don't think it ever happened because of some kind of, complex issue. But that kind of stuff is where you have to harness these big opportunities for the benefit of the small sports, for the society, for the businesses. Then there's Datatainment. Now, so first of all, I apologize for the word. It's a rubbish word, but it seems to have stuck. So I'm slightly lumbered with it. But the concept, I still stand behind. Basically, data, around sport in particular, is used by people who know what the data means, for people who know what the data means. It's a way of sort of owning the topic. It's exclusive. It does not invite people in. It does not invite people to, I love rugby, but hearing people talk about tackle percentages and, getting over the gain line and, most people don't understand what the hell is going on in rugby. I talked to the RFU, I said, they wanted to do an app. I said, there's only one app you need, it's a what the fuck app, so that people can work out what the hell is going on in the game at the time, Because there's a penalty for something, but nobody knows what went on, which is understandable. So you need to get to that point where you use data, because let's face it, the TV rights are sold. The TV rights are done. The TV rights for the FIFA World Cup, I'm pretty sure, are done out till 2030. It's sort of slightly insane. So how do you take those kind of rights and then work with this incredible sport and its power to engage with people in a way when you can't actually really use any of the video footage? Well, one of the ways is you get incredible data. And through the data, in digital in particular, you have the ability to be able to sort of stratify it out for different levels of understanding. So if I don't know anything about the sport at all, I can start with really basic questions like, what are the rules? Who win? How do you win? Is it scoring a bullseye, or if you hit 3 on the thing, that kind of question. But if I get more detailed and I have a greater understanding, I can dig in and really start looking at, as I said, tackle percentages and gain lines and all that kind of stuff. And I can express my love of the sport through it and learn through it. The trouble is that most people do that in ways like this. And now, actually, the guys at Squawka are great, right? And the Squawka app, if you're a football fan, it's really nice, and it works really well, and they're gathering data like crazy, and it's, it's a good thing. But I'm not a football fan. I wasn't brought up on football. It's just a mess. I just look at that and go, well, I suppose if I really had to, I could work out what the hell was going on, and I could click some buttons, but I can't be asked. Why would I bother? You get slightly better versions. There's a chap in America called Kurt Goldsberry, who's gone to work for a thing called Grantland, and they do some better versions. This is a basketball. This is a particular player. Who's this? Kobe Bryant. And you get to see that he scores more from here and there and there, and you go, oh, okay, interesting. But I still don't really understand basketballs because you haven't explained to me what that means. What's the outcome of that? It's this thing with data about, you have data. What is it? It's data, information, knowledge, wisdom. Is that the? There's some phrase about, you sort of grade yourself up. And it's the difference between knowledge and wisdom. The difference between that is knowing that a tomato is a fruit and knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. The problem with this is there's lots of showing of data, but not a lot of knowledge and even less wisdom. And it's not being used in a media way to entertain, to engage, to tell people stuff. So some of the guys who do lead the way, the interactive design department in the New York Times, very good. They know what they're doing. They do some lovely interactive graphics. This is one they've done for the World Cup, and it's a bit sort of one-dimensional. You click Barcelona, and it goes in, and it tells you who's there and who all there is. But for an American audience who don't really know about soccer, it's kind of useful to be able to give them something to explore and to click in with. So it starts to show you about who's a powerful base, because you can immediately go, oh, look, Bayern Munich, Manchester United. Actually, when you do go into Bayern Munich, Manchester United, Bayern Munich, hell of a lot of German players in there. Now, to me, that's an interesting story. It's like, why has the German team got, or rather, why has a lot of the German league got a lot of German players, where a lot of the British league has a lot of non-British players? How does that? That's the interesting story. So, I also wanted to show you just a prototype that we built for City a couple of years ago. It still hasn't gone live, and probably never will, because some prototypes do. What I was trying to get, this is shallow level of understanding. I was trying to get to something where my mum, who also doesn't know about football, would say, who's the best player? And that you would have 5 simple metrics of being able to understand who the best player was. And they're probably on the basis of ball control, agility, speed, strength, kind of sort of like trump card kind of basic understanding of what the sport is in. But try to represent it in a visually interesting kind of way. So you can see we've drawn stuff from games interfaces. It's black on the background instead of white. It's got dials and things and charts that move, and you can press play and stuff will happen, and it feels more dynamic in there. But my favorite bit about this idea was that what we were going to do is test all the players, put all their data in, then give you the ability to be able to do your tests. So even if it was just a point-to-point, yo-yo bleep test running thing, or a speed and you ran around an obstacle course, you get kids doing it in the park. You get Sunday league teams doing it and measuring their own self and uploading it. And suddenly you're moving into a world where you're doing a Top Gear star in a reasonably priced car kind of moment. And then it's fun, and then it's engaging. And then you've got league tables and different teams playing against each other and all that kind of stuff. But also, crucially, I went into football basically thinking footballers were a bunch of girls' blouses who, fell over every time they were tackled. Because I was brought up on rugby, and you don't fall over if you get tackled. Well, you do fall over if you get tackled, but try not to. And now, having worked in it, I now have a huge amount of respect, actually, for these guys who have, actually quite incredible physical skill and stamina and training and ability to understand their teammates. So if you can bring that knowledge and understanding to people through the use of data, what a difference that would make. It would stop some of the tribalism. You can still have identity and competition, but it might stop some of the tribalism. So, why do people change? What are the things that make businesses adapt to digital? I want to pull back a little bit and just talk about digital technology and its impact on businesses as a whole, particularly, of course, with sport in mind. So, reason number one why they change is they are standing with their back to a cliff edge, their business is dying, and they have no other option but to go digital. And I give you the newspaper industry, whose revenues have been plummeting for 10 years now, more than 10 years. And almost every one of them, at one stage or other, has gone, do you know what we're going to do? We're going to go digital. We're going to go web first. We're all going to, you know, and then they sort of oscillate massively. They invest like crazy, and then they don't. The E-Telegraph. The E-Telegraph was one of the best online newspapers in the very early days. When I launched BBC News Online in '97, the E-Telegraph were the guys to beat. But then after about 2 or 3 years, the Telegraph went, we're not making any money out of this. Why are we doing this? And they just basically shut it all down again. And that happens a lot of the time, oscillation between these things. So reason number one why people change and adapt to digital technology is because they have to. Now, the problem with that, of course, is they then think it's the Holy Grail. They then say, oh, well, so digital is going to solve all of our problems. And they hire in a head of digital, and he or she becomes the messiah. And then 6 months later, they find out that actually digital can't solve all the problems of the music industry or the film industry or the newspaper industry, and so they get disenchanted with it, and then it all goes pear-shaped, and then they go through the cycle again. Now you do get people who do it the right way for the right reasons, and I was lucky. The chap called Gary Cook, who was at Manchester City, he came from a Nike and marketing background. Now, he didn't really understand digital, but he had a vision. He was going to build a global entertainment brand. He said, we're a football club, but we are not just about Saturday afternoon kickoff. We are about building a global entertainment brand, and if we're going to do that, we need to have a really, really strong digital unit. So he backed us and supported us from the top, from the CEO. Incredibly powerful, very, very good. If you get the vision, it's great. Most people don't have it. This chap's an American academic called Clay Shirky, and Clay says revolution in any field means the old stuff that people used to do starts failing, but most of the new stuff that people try also fails. It fails too. Now that describes to me our digital industry very well, because so much stuff has been tried and then not worked. The key thing is the revolution doesn't happen when society adopts new tools. It happens when society adopts new behaviors. New behaviors. So let's look at some of the new behaviors, right? This is what is driving the need for businesses to adapt to digital. New behavior number one. I love this picture. Does anybody know what that is? What event that is? It's the same picture 8 years apart. Very good. St. Peter's Square. The announcement of the Pope, the Annunciation, when he comes out on the balcony. And in 2005, there's a mobile on the bottom right. I think there's a sort of one on the bottom left. That's about it. 2013, my God. Everybody's got a device. But not only have they got a device, look at them, they're capturing content. They're making videos, they're making photos, they're doing selfies with the Pope behind them on the balcony. Now, if I was advising the Pope, and I'm not advising the Pope, but if I was advising the Pope, I would say, put some Wi-Fi in St. Peter's Square, because you're going to have 40,000 people who are just going to splurge that out over the internet in a way that's going to be amazing and interesting and exciting and fun and accessible, and you will basically go round the filter of the news media. That's something a lot of the football associations, you think about FIFA. In our work with FIFA on their social media, it is a significant consideration is how can we go straight to the people with the real story of what's going on. Now, I'm not going to get into the detail of FIFA, but there's a lot of good work done by FIFA. No one will ever hear about it because basically people only ever hear about corruption. But if you can go straight to the media, you're away. When I went to Ukraine 3 months ago, and just before the stuff all kicked off, and it was all a bit hairy, and I was very conscious that I was coming in under the auspices of a European organization. I was talking about all the techniques you can have to disintermediate the establishment and go direct to the people and all that kind of stuff. I was very well aware that if I had my old news journalist hat on, I'm not sure I'd have been allowed to be making the same revolutionary talk about how you can, it's basically, it was Arab Spring technique that I was teaching them, but I was just telling them how to do it for football instead. So, it's not just there. This is, if any of you go to a sporting event, you see more and more of this, don't you? People with iPads in sporting events. Now, the old fogey in me immediately thinks, you're going to drop it, you're going to lose it, it's too big, it's too expensive. But more and more people doing that, and, it's this. I was lucky enough to go to the Champions League final, and this is invited guests of UEFA and UEFA people. So you will face people in sport world who will say, oh, no. When you go to a football game, what you want to do is just watch the football game. Rubbish. Because, let's face it, football games are not always exciting. There are dull moments, it turns out. Even the man from Barcelona admitted to me there are occasionally dull moments. And then, of course, there's the half-time when, the referee, you can see, the referee starts putting the whistle to his mouth. People are in there, they've got their phones, they're out, they're immediately trying to communicate. Now, most organizations at the moment, they don't have the connectivity in the stadium. That's a problem. But actually, they don't facilitate it. They don't moderate it. They don't try to find a way to harness that energy and do something really positive with it. That's what they should do. This is my favorite guy, by the way, on the mobile. I just thought I'd throw him in because he was on the plane with me coming back. I love the fact that he's got an old-fashioned Nokia, a 3G iPad, and he pulled out his work BlackBerry. And I swear he had an iPhone tucked away somewhere as well, So, okay, so mobile is one thing, right? The other thing is games, of course. So incredibly powerful social change going on is not only an interactive media format, but also the fact that people do this a damn sight more than they watch TV if they're under the age of, and at which point most people go 15 or 18 or 20, but the stats aren't that. The stats are like 30 or 35 or two. There's lots of people who basically don't need a TV license anymore. They're just going to play a game. And then you're in a whole nother Ofcom related conversation. But this kind of audience, is a very different thing. Does anybody play FIFA 14 in the room? Any FIFA 14 players? One here, two? Yeah, okay. If you play FIFA 14, this is what they know about you. Some of that stuff's pretty obvious, right? Age, country, location, platform, theme. I did stop after 2 columns, putting in all the lists of things that EA knows about players of FIFA 14. They have 18 million people playing the desktop, or the console version rather, and they have 50 million people playing the mobile version. And they just crunch the numbers, right? Because you can see the patterns of behavior in there. My favorite is the top of the right-hand column. Forecast spend. You're trying to work out your ARPU in terms of your consumer. They know very precisely all the different tiers of spend that will come from your playing behavior. How often do you play? How long do you play for? How do you play with friends? They can tell not only when you're next likely to buy the upgrade and next likely to pay for a subscription package, but they can tell, are you likely to click on adverts? Are you likely, there's a whole bunch of stuff here. So this is fundamentally, what they've managed to crack is the 2 golden things in digital, which are love and data. Right? Because people love this game. And if you can get their data while they're loving it, you're in a lovely, happy place. So I'm going to show you 2 different organizations, and you can tell me if you were running an organization and you had to adapt to digital, you tell me which of these next 2 you want to be like. Okay, so you can be digital organization number 1 is going to be like that. Or you can be digital organization number 2 is going to be like this. Yeah. This, God love them. This is the Broncos. And this is also one of their promotional videos, and I'm being a little harsh because it's not exactly one of the ones they use, front and forward. I love it.
The Broncos wrestle the AFC Championship from the defending world champion.
So the issue there, right, what's the organizational issue that's going on in the background? It is very simply that the San Francisco 49ers have a CEO, a CTO, and a COO, all of whom are ex-Facebook. And they're in San Francisco. And their market and their audience expect digital to be part of their offering. In fact, not just part of their offering, the mainstay of most of what they do. They're building a new stadium at the moment. It's an incredible investment, and it will just totally transform sports experience. Actually, maybe that's a little hyperbolic. It won't totally transform sports experience, but it's going to make a big leap forward in that particular connected stadium area. These guys Their CEO is from the logging industry, and he's been the CEO of the Broncos for about 30 years. And they I mean, you know, comedy videos aside, this is absolutely what they behave like. So, change, the context of change. We're back to why do people change? And I'm going to talk a little bit about why they do and why they don't, and what I think stops it. And therefore, how we fix it. So, about 5 years ago, I'm sitting in a meeting, I'm working with the Top Gear guys, you know, incredible job of turning it into a global entertainment brand. Nerdy car program to global entertainment brand. And incredible business, frankly. And there's basically two guys in the team who come up with all the ideas. There's a guy called Andy Willman, who's the producer, and there's Jeremy Clarkson, who's Jeremy Clarkson. And the others come up with ideas, but these are the two mainstay. They're the two who founded it, you know, really kind of turned it around way, way back when. And I'm sitting beside Andy, and it's our first meeting. It's our first meeting about digital strategy. And this is what Andy wrote. And I had that moment of like, oh, okay, right, I understand. But he was just sitting beside me and he scribbled that. I thought, right, that's where we're starting. Computer meeting is digital strategy. Brilliant. I mean, if I'd fixed his IT, he probably would have been quite happy. But, you know. So you get this fundamental problem with just some people. It's not their thing. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But if it's your business and it's going to transform it because of what we've been looking at in terms of the way the audience behave, then you need to have a way of handling it. Which reminded me of this. God bless him. This is Arthur before he was Arthur. I'm guessing some of you got kids. Yes. Okay. So you remember when the kids are on the way, first time, you have no idea what to expect. And they tell you, right, you might get a sleeper, or you might not. Or they might sleep one day, and then the next day, or you might one that's tall, or short, or fat, or thin, or active, or not. It could be absolutely anything. There's fundamentally only one thing that anybody ever said to me that was useful before Arthur was born, which was, you're going to have to adapt. You just keep adapting. Just go with the flow and adapt. Which, thankfully, for me, was really calming, because I'd spent my entire career, since I was a radio journalist at the BBC, and it turned out I was much better at making and running websites, so I flipped over into web very, very early on. So at this stage, by the time he came along, I'd had 18 years worth of adapting to whatever the new pieces of technology. You know what it's like. It comes out every week. What's the one? You seen the Yo app? Right? £1 million worth of investment. It basically, you download the app, and you download the app, and I can send you a message that says Yo. That's it. Right? But fine, you know, and WhatsApp and so, you know, there's a new thing every week or every day coming out. And you need the ability, organizationally, to be able to be flexible, to be able to adapt to it. You need to have built a culture that can do that. Because, right, I mean, I've got mainframe computing 1960s on here, but actually I should have had Mr. Booth and, you know, all the way way back when. And, you know, I'm up here in the 2000s, and frankly, this could be, you know, the pace of change is too quick. You can't even keep your slides going. There's so much change going on. And, you know, here's an example of something that is pretty mainstream and accepted by, you know, old age pensioners very happily use this quite comfortably. The BBC's done a very good job of designing it in a way that it's broad acceptance, works on multiple platforms. It's, you know, made a real difference in the country. I wanted to give you this example as well. Can't remember his first name. There's a very good article on Mashable about it. A chap called Sasson is his surname. And he's basically the inventor of the digital camera. Back in 70-something. Mid-70s. And you can see what he's got together is he's got a lens from a stills camera, and he's got, you know, a whole bunch of different chipboards, and he's all wired them together. And he's got the data, which takes 26 seconds to capture, being captured in a cassette on the side of the machine, which I love, you know. It's good. Now, he was working for Kodak. This was what was brought out 20 years ago last Friday. 20th of June, 1994. Now, what's weird about it, it was the first mass public digital camera. Consumer product is the words I was looking for. What's odd about it is that it is a Kodak camera, but Kodak didn't believe in digital. Digital was basically 0% of their revenue streams and pretty much 0% of their revenue plans, but they kind of had to be in it, and they had a bunch of boffins who'd been working like the other guy for years because they knew this was kind of something interesting. So they kind of, you know, but we've got our entire Kodak business here, and it's all, you know, doing very well. Why would we want to disrupt the market? Why would we want to adapt and change our business models? It's too risky. It's just too risky. A little bit. It reminds me of newspapers. Why would we want to go web first? So they talked to this young company, well, not that young, Apple. And they said, well, what if you put it out under your brand? Because you know how to market these things, and you can make it look stylish, and you can sell it. And we also have a bit of plausible deniability. We don't have to, you know, we can have it over there, and it can do its thing. Now, digital cameras, it turns out, have done quite well. The problem with Kodak is that problem. Because Kodak filed for bankruptcy, or did they just sort of implode 2 years ago? Because they didn't adapt to digital at all. The people, however, is fundamentally the biggest blocker. And this is why I'm delighted we've got somebody, Jill, on the panel this evening, because she actually knows what really goes on in organisations, whereas I've just sort of experienced stuff and tell anecdotes about it. So we'll be able to hopefully put some logic about it. But people and the way in which they sort of, you know, cause trouble. Number one, biggest problem. Oh, come on. Right, that's a big problem. Now, if you're lucky and you go to somewhere like Man City and you've got Gary Cook and he's a great leader, and then you get some people who want to follow, you're away. There are, unfortunately, an awful lot of organisations who are... I mean, actually, usually what happens in the BBC, the fundamental problem was that the guys who'd made their way up the journalistic chain switched over into management, but actually didn't really have any management experience. It's a fundamental problem. I have to say, bearing in mind that journalism is all about information control and you know, sort of telling stories and knowing stuff and keeping it very close. Doesn't make a good manager. And I would suggest that some sports people do not make tremendously good CEOs. And if you look at the list of, I mean, you know, you could take the Premier League, or actually that's probably not the best example because they are beginning to change, but lots of leagues, lots of sports clubs, lots of sports bodies, they're run by people who are passionate or intent or love the sport or were really successful in it one way or another. But unfortunately, the number of people who can transfer over their skills into being a genuine, you know, leader from a business perspective, that's more difficult. It's different. So poor leaders and followers is problem number one. Problem number two, are these kinds of stereotypes. Now tell me you don't know some people in your organisation who are like this. We have the King Canutes, and I know I'm bastardising the truth of the actual tale, but King Canute, somebody who is effectively, maybe Luddite. A Luddite would be a better description. Somebody who genuinely would rather destroy the thing than accept the new change. Someone who's going to push back the tide. Someone who would just if I, you know, I can reject it. The dinosaurs. Now, I thought they were all dead, but it turns out they weren't. A lot of them have gone to work in sport. And some other industries as well, you know, bless them. The problem with the dinosaurs is, of course, that they will die out eventually. They just, you know, some of them are on the, well, look, I'm retiring in 2 years anyway, so I don't really want to go changing the business. And some of them are just, you know, they're just too old to be bothered getting it. The charlatans are my biggest threat. They're the ones I really hate, partly because, you know, a lot of them, you know, the digital industry has made a lot of rods for its own back by basically flogging the latest, coolest new thing, or telling people they can fix their problems. I had an argument with a guy called Robert Elstone, who's the CEO of Everton, on a panel conversation. I mean, you know, a gentlemanly argument. And Robert's fundamental problem was that he didn't believe in what he described as all this marketing fluff, which included CRM. And eventually I kind of like, I don't understand why, you seem like a nice chap, why on earth are you just rejecting everything out of hand? You just wouldn't get on board with anything, even all, you know, just sensible. And it turned out that he had been persuaded about 8 years previously to spend a lot of the club's money on, when he was the CFO, on, I think it was a Siebel CRM system, which was very expensive, was never implemented properly, was actually probably the wrong system and they didn't need it anyway, and therefore never ever yielded any value to his business. It just caused him hassle. Dangerous converts, excitable bunnies, we know them, and the geek clique. That's you know, coders and geeks and people who decide that they actually just kind of want to, you know, keep it to themselves, keep all the jargon. Limited vision, focusing on the shiny bauble, a bad thing. Institutional lethargy. A bad thing. God bless the BFI. I really have to say, BFI is a wonderful organisation. There was a slight problem, which was they brought me in as a head of digital business development, and we developed some prototypes and some projects and some business models that were really going to help the BFI. And I took them to the senior management team, and they looked at them and they said, you know what, these are good products, these are good things, we should definitely go there. Let's get a working group together. And then they can look at it for 6 months, and then they can report back towards the end of the year, and we can take it towards the next AGM. And you just sort of think, oh God, you've just killed it, right? Because these are ideas of the moment. If we take 9 months or a year to deliver them, that's part of your problem, is that you just can't move swiftly enough. Organizational inflexibility, yeah, part of the same thing, and fundamentally people like us is a big issue. People in sport hire people from sport. It's the same in any sector. People from film hire people from film. It's a big problem. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I hire people who don't come from sport, who come from other sectors. It's one of the reasons why, not being a football fan, I worked well inside Man City because I came with an external perspective. So you need people like this. It's another or, right? It's a liger. It's a lion and tiger hybrid. You need a hybrid. Points if you know what one of those is. It's a Z-donk, obviously. Come on. You need hybrids, okay? You need your business to be able to adapt. You need your business to be able to get to a point where it can just change and adapt. That's difficult organizationally to do. So I remembered vaguely sort of making a list of things I thought were really important for a business to do in this kind of world back in 2003, back in the crazy days post-dot-com crash. This was my list. This was my list. I felt a lot younger then. Number 1, know what you don't know and admit it to somebody else. We're in Rumsfeld territory, right? And that's really important, particularly in digital technology, because if anybody comes to you and says, yeah, I'm a digital media expert, they are a liar. Because you can't be. You can know some stuff, and definitely some people know more than others, but it's very, very difficult to be an expert because there's just too much going on all the time. Learning curve is, you have to love learning. Number 2, be prepared to learn all the time. There we go. And from everybody and anybody. Be prepared to adapt, be fearless, and live it. It's very difficult to drive digital change inside an organization if you basically don't have an email address, don't use your phone at weekend, and aren't willing to give a go. You don't have to be the world's most prolific Facebooker, but you want to be able to give it a go and go, oh, well, that's interesting, and then dip in and out. So then I thought, okay, back to our question today. Digital technology, transforming the power of sport, big events, all these things coming together. Change is scary, that's fine. Change is a constant. Know your weaknesses and where you are on the digital journey. Are you in an organization that's going, yeah, it's great, we're going to hire loads of people? Or are you in one that's going, oh Christ, it's rubbish and we're going to sack everybody? Or what? Where are you on that journey? Identify how it fits in the business, work out what kind of hybrid organization you're making. Leadership is really important. There's, some things that go in for language and targets. Guy who used to run, which one? One of the record companies was, can't remember, Sony, I think it might have been. He basically one day decided, right, what we're going to do is I'm going to stop talking about records, I'm going to start talking about downloads. And we need 1,000 downloads this year, that's what we put in the budget, but I'm going to talk about 10,000 because we need the organization to get on board, to just recognize the import of this from the top. Really powerful. Unfortunately, that was also the same company in 2000, I think, who paid £800,000 for Westlife's non-music digital rights. It's possibly one of the stupidest investments of all time. Basically for digital pictures of them and, hey, we're going to be on the forums and it's going to be amazing. Because that's pre-Facebook, pre-Twitter. Plan for change. And fail better. I think I am. I'm out of time. Thank you so much for listening to me ramble on. And we're going to have, hopefully, an interesting conversation. I'm happy to ask questions. Do you want me to do questions? Or do we do the questions during the panel, maybe?
Maybe we'll do that.
Do the questions back. Right. Thank you very much. Are you all right there? Do you want to sit in the middle?
It's
seems that we are one chair short.
All right.
That's fine, right?
Okay.
So what we do is if each one of you, well, except Richard, takes a few minutes to introduce yourselves and share some of your thoughts about digital media and technology and sport.
And a load of old
and we
cobblers.
kind of have an order. So Alex, if you could.
Sure. Okay. Hi everyone. I'm Alex Baltha. I've spent, like Richard, was a journalist and then jumped the fence when I started writing about the internet in around 1994 and realised I knew about as much as anyone I was talking to. And since that time, found myself building things, and in a sport niche, I I ended up being chairman of a website called Crick Info, which we then sold to ESPN as the world's largest cricket website, and skipped through one thing or another, early involved in the Guardian newspaper and developing all their websites. But anyway, skipping forward, the last 6 years through 2012, I was head of digital, or my title was head of new media, and that's a title that's gone with the wind, for 6 years, and ran all the London 2012 digital properties. I suppose my experience reflects, I suppose as Richard would have it, on client side or brand side, my experience of running digital in sport was, encompassed in what happened in 2012. When I arrived there in 2006, employee number 73, I was invested with the virtual magic wand, where the organisation sort of saw what I did, didn't really understand it, but hoped that I would be able to address the younger audience that they were missing, and then I could just get on and do it, thank you very much, and not bother them. Turned out that my brief started with an ask for one website at the time when we were organising the games, and then a slightly bigger one at the time of the games. Instead, my small team built 80 different websites and 3 apps and over 100 social media channels. More than anything, because we were simply reflecting the demand that consumers had to consume the games in all its various forms through digital channels. And the big growing up process for me, and I suppose my colleagues, and in some sense digital media in general, was no longer to be the people who did fancy stuff and got away with it, but actually we were fundamental to what the business needed to do. And every part of the business would come to us and say, I need a digital channel because I need to sell tickets, I need to find 70,000 volunteers, I need to send materials to 20,000 schools around the country, and whatever it might be, suddenly they had a digital requirement because consumers out there were calling for it. So I suppose another part of the story of organizations moving to digital is simply reflecting where as Richard showed, Clay Shirky talking about behaviours, the technology has changed, and now the behaviours have also. So the majority of people in most westernized countries are using digital media actively every day, every second even, and organizations simply need to catch up and be part of that, because if they're not, then they're missing the opportunity to communicate with a large part of their base. I think in sport's a very interesting position, and I found myself drawn. In fact, I'm now working in another sport, having thought I would leave sport aside for at the end of last year and joined an ad agency, because sport's terribly compelling, especially in the digital media mix, because it reaches so many people. It's a vital part of our cultural landscape. It's a huge part of our media landscape, especially in this increasingly disaggregated media world where there are so many different channels and different distractions. Live sport still holds a huge amount of attention. I think Deloitte do an annual football money study. They think that the revenues of clubs are going to be averaging, or rights fees going up at least 15% even this year. I think there's going to be more money in sport, not less, more focus on sport, because it's the one thing that in this mixed landscape draws people in. But I think generally sports organizations are extremely lazy in the way that they use digital media, because not least because they have huge amounts of attention, often, depending on the sport, a lot of revenue they can generate from traditional sources, and they don't feel the compelling business need to, frankly, future-proof their businesses and do digital well and do digital right. Often they get away with that and paper over the cracks because of the size and reach of their events, Football World Cup being one of them, and I concur that FIFA actually do a lot of great work behind the scenes, but they don't spread their wings as fully digitally as they might, and it's a challenge to do that. We certainly found that at London, but I think maybe I'll leave you with that point, that I think sport has a huge opportunity to do an awful lot more.
Good.
See if I can get this. No, it is on. Hi, yeah, my name's Dan McLaren. I founded the UK Sports Network, so I've been writing about the use of social media, especially within sport, for 4.5 years, and also been kind of practicing what I preach in terms of, I was the first social media manager for Adidas through Cara Media back in 2010, and then went on to work for the global sides with We Are Social, looking after working on football, so going up to Euro 2012. Tennis, so Wimbledon's always been a fun one to work on, especially with Andy Murray. I was very lucky to be working on tennis the year that he won the Olympics and the US Open. So I'm kind of very interested in what brands do, as well as federations, and one of the kind of bit I wanted to kind of throw into the mix was some of the challenges that brands have, especially who are sponsors of things like the World Cup, which impacts on the federations and the clubs as well, because obviously it's an issue that they need. And to kind of highlight that, I mean, FIFA's revenue, I think they're due to bring in around $4 billion around this World Cup cycle, of which 1.4 billion comes from 22 companies. And that's a lot of revenue. I think there've been Adidas and a few others have signed up now till 2022. So they're obviously, still going along with the traditional model, but it's becoming harder and harder. And the use of the kind of proliferation of digital platforms and social platforms is really opening up that side of things up. So it's harder. So ambush marketing is a real kind of threat to traditional companies like your Adidas's, Sony's, etc. I mean, you ask people to name who are the sponsors of the World Cup, is it Adidas or Nike? Most people probably say Nike. Is it Pepsi or Coke? Most people probably won't know that it's Coke, because there are different routes in which they can go down now. I mean, Nike does a great job around especially the big events. I'm sure, Alex, in terms of London 2012, with Adidas being the main sponsor for the UK side, that's an issue that really affects the brands and what they can do. But it does also have the kind of advantages as well. I mean, has anyone seen that on the Twitter account? They've got Brazuca, which is the Adidas football this time, and they launched their own Twitter account, which has just passed 2 million followers. And have already said that they've got a 30% increase on their sales of the ball compared to South Africa 2010. So, how much of an impact having that social side of it is had on that is hard to tell. I did find a random stat, as you do, from analytic partners who say having a strong digital and social program could generate an extra 2 to 6% revenue. So, but that's working on if you have $1 billion revenue that you're making between 10 and 30 million. So it is still kind of quite a small dent, but you do need it in terms of trying to stand out. I thought some random stats to throw in at the end. I mean, for FIFA this year, they do some good work as well. They have increased, they've got over 4 million in the last week extra Facebook followers, and they've increased by 14.8 million in the last month, which is a huge interest around it. But FIFA Digital, they've got 68 people on the ground just in their digital team this year, and they're producing content in 6 different languages. So it shows you the kind of huge operation that it is now, and it's a huge opportunity for the federations and the sponsors to really engage, and they put a huge amount of focus on these major events. So there are challenges and there are opportunities, I think, for both sides.
Is this working? Yeah. Hi, so my name's Nick. I'm a COO at a company called Big Balls Films, which is an amusing name. But what we do is we run a network of digital sports channels, primarily on YouTube, and we also have a digital content studio, so we make films and branded content series for brands. I guess why it's interesting to be here today is that we have sort of approached sport very much as outsiders, so all of our sports content doesn't feature any rights that we've paid for. So we came at the problem of how do we sort of create a football channel on YouTube without access to rights that we can't afford. And to Richard's point, we looked at everything other than what went on the pitch. So our insight was around the average sort of 16 to 24-year-old isn't engaged by the match of the day pundits or the guys sitting around behind a table talking around stats. We wanted to create a platform for all of that passion and engagement around the game that just isn't there. So on that hunch and insight, we created a channel called Copper 90, which is now the largest independent football channel on YouTube, with over 700,000 subscribers, doing about probably 5 million views a week or so. And we've got to the stage now where we've sort of got a decent-sized media property. So we have brands come and approach us to see if, alongside their sort of traditional media spend, they can actually engage a youth audience at a different level. And so we've worked with the likes of Adidas and Hyundai. We're doing a whole load of stuff for them out at the World Cup, them being an official sponsor, EA and people like HTC as well. So what these guys have come to us for is they know that they are reaching an audience through their TV campaign, but are they actually engaging them in an audience? Sorry, in a proper sort of engaged manner. And just a little stat that we have. So in the first 5 weeks of our Hyundai work, so we created 2 sort of branded content series, one of which is still live, sort of on the ground out in Brazil. In the first 5 weeks of our Hyundai work, we delivered the equivalent amount of engagement time that you would have done if you'd bought a 30-second ad spot on Coronation Street. So we delivered 55,000 hours of watch time, which is about 6.5 million 30-second ad spots. But the difference with our content was that the performance of it is absolutely transparent. So we know that nobody during our stuff was making a cup of tea or was out of the room because they would have clicked a button and walked off. And we're also able to then measure actual engagement around the content as well. So TV and broadcasters are able to talk about the number of impressions that they've delivered, whereas we can actually say 5 to 8% of our audience, when they watch one of our shows, are actually moved to like or comment or share on that show, which is sort of a real measure of actual sort of real engagement. And that, if I was to sort of talk about 2 ways that we look at sort of digital as a sort of a digital-only business working in the sports space, is we look at the quite clear delineation between audience versus community. So audience is something that anybody can buy. Nike buy it every time they launch a new ad, which is a fantastic ad, but it's just audience. They're just buying views. So they will have 16 million views in the first day, and that will do a job for them. But what brands can't buy, and this is where there is value in a longer-term commitment, as Richard points out, to investing in digital, but investing in it not in a cynical way, but in sort of a long-term way about building capability, is that you can only build community by actually investing in it and learning about your audience and speaking to your audience directly, as you're able to do now, and actually feeding that back into the way that you not only you sort of create your product, but then sort of create the rest of your business. And so that's why we've been sort of put ourselves into the happy position of being able to be a media property that engages an audience that's hard to reach, simply because we've invested in it, and that's what we only do. And that community is our sort of barrier to entry, is that you can't go out there and buy an 8 to 10% engagement rate around your content. You can't do that. You can buy millions of views, and another one of Richard's points is that you go in and an agency will say, yeah, we'll make it go viral, and sort of all those sort of happy words. And yeah, you can make it go viral. It'll just cost you 7 to 10 pence per view, and you just watch it go viral on day one. Or if you really want, you can, and that's how you look at those sort of case studies of viral phenomenon. Say the Dove campaign. You remember the one where they had the FBI sort of not sort of artist who was sort of asking that woman to sort of describe herself, and then sort of the men would describe her, and it sort of showed that sort of women sort of downplay their own beauty, and actually they're sort of much better perceived than they think. And it was a fantastic sort of creative idea, and then that went viral as they had sort of I think it was about 4 billion impressions or something really, really ridiculous. But the only reason it went viral was because it was a very, very well planned and executed media buy around all of that. So there was, fundamentally, was a great creative, but viral phenomenon these days are bought rather than created. And so that's why if you actually create a community, you can actually create longer term value. And that's, for me, the really big opportunity, particularly in sports and with sports clubs, is because they already have sort of, whether it's 15,000 or 80,000 people turning up every weekend to talk about and watch something that they love. And that's a really big opportunity that is still wide open in sports.
Hi everyone, my name's Jill. I get the honour of speaking last, so I'll try not to be too long because I think everyone's starting to look a bit tired, so maybe if we open up the floor to some questions, that would be good. I actually started off my career as a management consultant for my sins. I'm now doing consulting again with a company called Takeout, who I'm here representing. We very much work with companies, predominantly in the digital space, across a range of sectors and industries, typically working with clients to help them become more innovative and understand what's going on in the entrepreneurial space. Over my career, I've also been a director in a number of businesses, mainly in the digital space, ranging from a mobile startup way back in the first revolution of, WAP, etc. I've headed up the business development team at ITV way back. And again, for my sins, I've spent a huge chunk of my career working for online betting and gaming companies, which is the topic I'm going to talk about. So I'm probably moving a little away from my colleagues here in terms of what they've talked about, but obviously it's a subject that is close to my heart and hopefully of interest to you. So the first thing I'd say, which is a bit obvious, is that the online betting and gaming industry wouldn't actually exist without either digital technology or sport for that matter. I've been told actually not to mention this, but I'll mention it anyway because I find it's quite interesting. The gambling industry is actually the second largest industry in the world after the sex industry, I am led to believe. So it's a very, very large industry. It's very, very profitable. And in 2012, it was worth almost half. It was all, I can't even think of the number. It was worth almost like $500 billion, 500 billion, is that right? Dollars. And online is about 10% of that. What's again, I think, quite interesting over the last few years, when the rest of the world has been, rest of the world economies have been declining, the industry has carried on growing, anywhere between 10 and 30% year on year, which is phenomenal. If you just think about the UK, then it's almost doubled in size since 2009. And sport, finally on that point, I would say that sport is the reason that people bet. And nowadays you get up to 75% in betting companies. It's all about football. So it's all about football, football, football. That's what anybody's interested in. The second point I'd like to make is that the majority of this growth over the last 5 years have actually come from digital innovations, really around mobile and tablet. So it's quite scary when you look back, to 2005 and your photograph of, who had phones, what were people using phones for. It really is revolutionising, I think, how people are interacting with betting websites. And I think the first time people tried to use sort of it was first screen. When I worked at ITV 10 years ago, we were trying to innovate and get people to gamble via the red button on the telly. It didn't work at the time. The economics didn't work. The technology didn't work for numerous reasons. Now, with tablets and mobile, people are using that second screen and watching sport and basically betting as they go. So interactive telly is working now, but it's very much people using second screens and either betting using their second screens whilst they're watching the tellies or even online. So I think that's, we'd expect to see more of the same going forward. There are lots and lots of stats out there around this. Recently, a company called Paddy Power revealed that almost half of their revenues are actually coming from mobile, which is phenomenal in comparison to probably even 3 years ago, and it was 10%. And I think leading on from that theme, the third point is, again, a lot of the growth has been coming from technology improvements that have allowed things like in-play betting and streamed content, which have provided a lot of content and more opportunities for people to engage with the product. So technology improvements which have reduced latency, improved data processing times, mean that you can basically just publish a lot faster, and so people can bet on the fly as they go in play. And again, you typically see within football, the majority of revenues these days are coming from in-play betting, and I could bore you more about the number of football matches and opportunities that exist. But, you know, any betting site you go to, there is an opportunity to bet at any time of the day. Some websites will have up to 900 in-play football matches a week, 700 football leagues around the world, and each of those will probably have about 100 events. So 10 years ago, you wouldn't have been able to do this due to issues with technology, and now it's all there, and it's driving this 20 to 50% year-on-year growth. And then finally, before we just go to questions, is I just wanted to comment on the importance of social media for online betting, and whether it has been driving the industry, and the importance of that media to driving commercial return. I actually think it's questionable in terms of the success that's been seen. Doesn't mean to say it's not important, but some companies are using it, I think, to engage customers and engage punters, as you said. But and there's been lots of hype about people using sort of social in a gaming and a betting context, which hasn't really worked. I would expect to see more innovation, but I don't really think people are using it to communicate to customers, but people aren't really using it to innovate with product, and I'm not too sure, whether anyone is going to crack it, but I haven't yet. Yeah.
So at this point, I guess I should introduce myself as well. George Russos from the Department of Computer Science and Information Systems. And I represent the kind of guy with a tape recorder from Richard's slides. That's the kind of work we do. Don't be fooled by the suit today. As our dean will confirm, that's not how we usually.
That means you do the real work, right? That's good.
So in the department for the last 15 years or so, we've been working on what has come to be called the Internet of Things. So I guess I suggest different spin, that you emphasize this digital media point of view, and what we're seeing and what we've been working towards is that digital and physical are bringing together, and we have been working on technologies to do exactly this interlinking. I guess one of the things is that you get lots more data from everybody and all sorts of kinds of things, and it kind of democratizes data creation as well. It's not only elite sports athletes that you can monitor, but you can put yourself up against them. So you can match up your own performance against data streams that have been captured from that kind of experience that we only consume as image, I guess, now. And hopefully that would create a new set of questions for you guys. So questions from the floor now. There's a microphone, and I would like to ask you if you could talk into the microphone, because the proceedings are webcasted.
I only have one question. Do you feel like in digital, when you fail, or you have always, every time, a new challenge? It's like every time there's it's always work. It works well, but you feel like you didn't reach your goals. It's like you fail, or it's a new challenge.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always thought that the great joy of doing working in digital, and I was lucky enough to start when, certainly in terms of digital media, it became something that people outside of computer science labs started using in the early 90s. Effectively, working in the field means that you're constantly inventing the future. So, yes, there's never a finish point, but the exciting part is there's never a finish point. So you're constantly managing to doing new stuff, thinking about new ways of doing things, and moving on. And actually, there's lots of a sort of heat and light created by new apps or new highly funded startups. But there's a lot of day-to-day grind of change when people have moved on from different devices or different bits of hardware, and things just need to be changed so that people, whether it's because people have moved towards using a Chrome browser or they now use touchscreen phones or whatever it might be, that constant cycle of change is a constant running battle if you're trying to publish anything. And yes, and now the phenomenally interesting, now moving into an era of Internet of Things where I am certain our children, probably more like our grandchildren, will laugh to think that all our internet access was gated through a lifeless screen, but actually everything around us will now have some of the intelligence that network systems provide. The cycle, that what's interesting from a development point of view, or from someone working in trying to develop products, is actually your cycle goes back to a more traditional industrial cycle where, because things are being made, because it's hardware, it takes longer to develop stuff and bring it to market. Or even if that cycle is quite quick, what's difficult is then re-engineering it to adapt it to market. So there's an interesting change will come, but there's no question that the fundamental is you're constantly reinventing, and reinventing is fun.
Was the father of the revolution, is that Steve Jobs or was before?
It's always gone on. I mean, you go back to the telegraph, you go back beyond to the Industrial Revolution. There's different cycles of people adapting to change. So there's no end and no starting point. I know there was a whole IT phenomenon in the 60s of people developing silicon chips and suddenly changing how televisions are manufactured. So and there were a whole lot of kind of equivalent dot-com kids back then making a lot of money. It's a constant evolutionary process. But I think the difference now is because of electronic communications technology, the market for things is truly global, and the speed at which people can consume, speed at which things are produced, and the speed, more importantly, that they're distributed, has changed significantly. And that's why it seems like the velocity is so much faster than it was. It isn't necessarily in all things, but certainly in some areas and media, it has speeded up. But actually, the adaptation to change hasn't changed. The degree to which people adopt innovation, it's about a 7-year cycle from something coming out of a lab to reaching mass penetration, and that's been pretty consistent since colour television, GSM phones, broadband, touchscreen phones, whatever it is, because it does take people some time to adopt a new thing. But once they've adopted it, their behaviours start changing very quickly.
I think one of the huge challenge to people when they start doing a digital strategy is have a company and what am I going to talk about with the people, what's the content that I'll talk that they will really like it and enjoy and start seeing me as like a friend and not a company. And I'd like to know if you have any kind of, I don't know, strategy, how to come to this kind of, hey, I'm going to talk about this, and I think this will interest people. Any technique or, I don't know.
For me, I would say the basic thing is focus on the human stories. Simple as that. They're inside whatever the product is, because I did some work with an accountancy firm, and that's possibly the most boring business. It's only a very small accountancy firm as well. And their view was, yeah, you can do all this stuff with Man City. They have, an incredible cast of international celebrities, and they have drama every week, and of course you can tell loads of stories. That's easy. But actually, fundamentally inside what the accounting firm was doing was a whole bunch of good and interesting human stories as well, because they were supporting businesses, and they were changing people's lives, and they were doing all of it. So they found a way to plug into that, and then digital and social is particularly good at that. Or you take the nationwide route, and you just go straightforward practical. What's the thing it needs to do for my business? In Nationwide's case, it needs to answer customer service inquiries, because that's going to cut their call center costs. That's all they did. Yeah.
I'd also sort of add to that, there are some brands that, so YouTube will make a big song and dance about the success of Red Bull, how it's turned itself into a media business from just a soft drinks manufacturer. And some brands and brand managers and brand directors and CMOs could think of nothing scarier than having to tell stories about their company or what they do every single day of the week. So I think it is for some brands, and it isn't for others. So it's kind of, if you are lucky enough to have access to fantastic stories, and you have to think laterally about where those stories come from and how you talk about those, but it's not it's not necessarily right for all brands, generally speaking, because they're not set up to deliver that or understand it, rather than necessarily having access to those stories. I do think everybody can find interesting stories, but it's there is nothing more scary than that for lots of brands.
I think social channels, websites, likewise apps, they're just communication channels. Just like previously we had letters, we had faxes, we have television, we have radio, we have press. They're all just communication channels, but each of them requires an understanding of how those channels are consumed. So the nature of a lot of social media interaction is quite conversational and quite personal and quite friendly. So then it often makes sense to try and find a voice for your organisation which suits that medium and the way people use it. It doesn't mean that just because of the voice is friendly, that the content doesn't have to be considered. And you can't be quite careful. My experience at London 2012, I think a big part of the success of the games, if I'm allowed to call them a success, was the very, very severe and strongly disciplined media management we had around key issues. We only ever had 2 spokespeople, and although my team was responsible for running the social media channels, when times got tough, and that was often, not least because we had 100 journalists watching not just our accounts, but every social account out there and beating us over the head repeatedly when anything happened that they thought they could make a story out of. We were very careful to make sure that everything we wrote, even if our tone was friendly, was aligned with what our colleagues in the communications department were saying, so that there was never any division, there was never any gap there. But by and large, we hope we succeeded in still presenting a friendly face in all the right mediums, in ways that people could appreciate it. But it was still the same message, and it was still the same disciplines that you'd take to any other form of communication.
My question's probably for you, Richard, but I'd be interested, or the panel might be interested in what the answer is. So I'm a football fan. Every other week, season ticket holder, I get very frustrated at the lack of Wi-Fi connectivity at the club. I want to, at half-time, I want to be involved. I don't want to be queuing for a pie. I want to be involved. I'm interested, who's going to drive that connectivity forward? Is it the clubs? Is it the providers? Is it the corporate partners? Or are clubs actually more interested in, the 200,000 fans around the world and not the 20,000 in the stadium?
Generally, the problem is that for most clubs, it's the other way around. They're more concerned with the 20,000 in the stadium. But because of all the issues that we were talking about earlier on, their vision is limited to, and therefore the burgers need to be better and the toilets need to be bigger and all the practical reality. We need to get better parking and the flow in and all the rest of it. And fundamentally, they look at the cost of it. And an awful lot of sports businesses are pretty rubbish businesses. They're pretty small, very thin margins. And it's very difficult to say what we're going to do is we're going to capital investment. The guy from a major sporting body has estimated that you need to spend about £1.5 million to get a 30,000 stadium effectively done high-density Wi-Fi. And most people just don't have £1.5 million lying around. And then the thing is that quite rightly their board will say, why would you do it? And then they go, well, people will be able to order their burgers at it's very difficult to make a business case around it. And there are all sorts of different models that are being tried. Celtic have got 60,000 people connected on. Celtic have got it done, and it's done by a company called Sports Revolution, who are actually selling all the adverts on all the apps and everything in the stadium. So it's an ad-based model. Who else is doing? Ascot, weirdly, have Wi-Fi set up because they needed it for the back-end technology for the tote. Lords have done a deal with, I can't remember who it is. Is it the Cloud, maybe, or something? Yeah. So they're getting there. What's going to happen is it'll stop being Sporting Kansas in the States or the Barclays Center in New York that have it and have it done. It'll stop being just them. It'll start being more people. Suddenly the dominoes will start to go, and then the business models will emerge and will come through much more quickly. Because there are good reasons for doing it. It's just a question of capital investment up front, really, to be able to take that leap. It's about, and the ones who will take that leap, we're lucky enough to work with Valencia. Now, Valencia, does anybody know anything about Spanish football? Valencia have been in a horrible state for a long time. Financially, they had real problems in the crisis and whatever. They've just recently been bought by Peter Lim, which means multi-million-dollar investment. And one of the things they want to do is to really go at innovation. And they have a new stadium that they've got to move into. So, you know, they will be one of the leaders in Europe in how to do that. And then you'll start to see it emerge and change. It'll be one of those pace of change things that will accelerate. Which is your club? Watford. You might have to wait a little bit. I'm sorry to say.
I think there's some difference in kind of who drives the change as well. So the US, who kind of pushed it the most, because they're very kind of the federations take the lead on that. So I think it was the NFL who've gone through a kind of getting every single stadium Wi-Fi enabled. So they've got a program over kind of 2 or 3 years to get all this done. From the Premier League or something in the UK, that's just not the powers with the club, so it's a club decision rather than a league decision. And I had Scott from Everton was on one of my, I spoke to a few months ago, and this topic came up about Wi-Fi. And he said he spoke to just about every provider he could find out there, but no one came up with a solution that was viable for them. I mean, one of the issues they've got is the stadium as well, because it's a very old stadium.
A lot of steel, a lot of concrete.
If you're a Valencia and you're moving into a new stadium, it makes perfect sense. But if you've got a 100-year-old stadium that's really creaking at the seams, it's probably not going to be at the top of your agenda to get that done. But with 4G and now 5G being talked about as well, you know, is that a solution where you don't need the Wi-Fi, you can kind of utilise 4G instead?
It might be the sponsors. What do you think? It might be the sponsors or the betting companies who just say, guys, we need it done because we're going to have all these brand activations and opportunities.
Yeah. You would have thought there's a deal to be done somewhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's exceptional capex at this point, and at $1.5 million, that's a big bite of any budget, even at as Richard mentioned earlier. You know, if it's not in the budget, it's not in the budget, and you generally don't happen to have $1.5 million lying around at sports organisations or many other venues. If it's part of the build, it's part of the build, but otherwise, and at the moment, Cisco's the only real provider for this stuff, so the economics isn't there. There is a little interesting trial that happened at Brighton, out of Sussex University. I've forgotten the name of the company, but they created a mesh network using people's phones, but the dependency was that any phone that had connectivity would effectively share it with all the others in the network. I've been told by a Brighton fan that it wasn't that effective, but at least it was a smart way of thinking around. You know, it was a pretty cheap install, but effectively you get every phone to download an app, they then share connectivity mutually, and there's some communication between them. I can see more of that stuff sort of happening if that hardware or software becomes available, but it is one of these things that will probably lag. It'll lag people's real-world experience of Wi-Fi in other places. It will come round. At London, we spent 2 years discussing, as part of our spectator experience piece, with all the mobile networks and with BT, who were our communication sponsor, how we could get Wi-Fi in stadiums. And initially everyone said, well, tough, because it's not part of the brief. And to be fair to BT, certainly wasn't part of what they had to pay for. They were finally persuaded to do it, partly for benefit of offload from networks. And in fact, the network worked pretty well. They did put a gating factor where you had to be a BT internet subscriber to use it, but actually worked pretty well, which was definitely unique for a major event.
If you had if your chairman or your CEO at Watford said, got £1.5 million to spend, would you rather I spend it on a striker or on putting Wi-Fi in the stadium? What would you go?
I'll be honest, I'd rather have the experience. I'm older than my hero now, so I don't care.
Okay, fair enough. Get enough you people together, you're away.
The next question.
This is probably directed towards Richard and Dan. Given most football or rugby or basketball clubs generally think about the revenue streams on the basis of attracting people to games, of which a lot of them sell out their grounds quite easily, sales of merchandise, which once again is probably a finite amount of that you can really achieve, and also jersey sponsorship or club sponsorship. How would each of you pitch your services to one of those clubs to say, you know, how you can actually achieve real discernible value for one of those organisations?
Okay. I think probably my first thing would be to understand their scale of ambition. You've got a 30,000-seater stadium and you're selling those tickets and whatever. You have a limited business, as you say. You know, however much, even if they all 30,000 bought shirts, you know, and presents for their kids and everything else. And I would start looking at the potential to reach new audiences and grow their identity. You know, Arsenal, for example, last year they switched so that instead of having a subscription TV service, it became free on the basis of free digital membership. And that was because Arsenal very clearly identified that if they want to grow as a business, I mean, you know, bearing in mind they're a pretty significant sports business anyway, right? But if they wanted to grow, the way they had to do it was to get into international audiences, and they could only do that effectively if they had all of the data capture from all of those people who were joining. And the way to do that was to use all this incredible content they've got to engage people in that way and grow internationally. And I don't think they'll really think about, you know, ad sales and selling shirts online for a couple of years. They're just going to nail the content and brand reach and growing the database, and then they'll kick in with the sponsor value in 2 or 3 years' time. Because that global audience reach is what sponsors really want to get to. So, you know, I suppose my pitch to them would be digital, not specifically us, but digital will plug you into all of that.
I think that's what City did a great job of when they started. They realised that you had to go from a relatively local brand, because, you know, they'd been a yo-yo club for many years. Suddenly they want to become a global entertainment business. And you have to put a certain amount of investment in that to reach the new audiences. So, you know, City were very, very public and Richard did a lot of speaking as well, quoted in a lot of, so part of it's almost a PR exercise to start in certain respects. But it's also, I think, you know, understanding what are the objectives of there. You know, it's not just, you know, how many new followers can I get, but it's, you know, plugging in that whole, taking the data, the CRM side of it, making sure that everything's plugged in. I think, going back to Everton again, last couple of Christmases, they've done a really good kind of Christmas campaign, which ties in their social media platforms to the CRM, to their merchandise, to their season tickets. So, you know, they're collecting data at all these points, and also they're, you know, making money as well. So they're selling half-season tickets. And it's been, you know, they've come up with good results in the last couple of years trying that. So it's going to define what it's not. We're just going to do a campaign to get X number, you know, 10% more for Twitter followers. They're actually doing something with it and utilising their platforms for it.
I'll give you 2 different examples that are very, very different. One of them is from West Bromwich Albion, I think. Yes, West Brom wanted to hire a young 23-year-old social media guy, right? Because that's all they could afford. That's what they wanted to hire. They couldn't get it through the board. They couldn't get it through the chairman. He was just like, we're not spending money on that. We spend money on the pitch. You know, a little bit, I guess, like the Watford scenario. And he was persuaded when the commercial director held up 2 league tables, one of Facebook, one of Twitter, and in both cases they were below Brentford. And his actual words were, I never want to be below Brentford in any league table. Yes, you can hire him, right? That's the entire business case, was a league table. You know, and the other end of the occasion, last week it was in Georgia, and Georgian football it's not dying, but the heritage is evaporating. Because although it's a very passionate country that loves its football, they don't have any of the video rights from any of the stuff that was, you know, it was in the Soviet era. The stuff that is available is on YouTube. It's extremely poor quality. And so older guys look at it and they love it and they get the tingle down their spine as they remember a moment, but they can't, you know, you can't show that to a teenager and go, oh, it was an amazing moment. It was the first goal of an independent Georgia after, you know, it means something to them, but it doesn't mean anything to the history. So they genuinely, the strategy that we built with them is going to be, it's effectively saving the heritage of Georgian football for the future growth of the sport in the country. Just, you know, totally different business cases.
We are running out of time, so let's take one last question.
So we've talked a lot about digital technology and social media impacting sport, but I work for BT, which has obviously recently is interested in technology, but also in media and sport. What do you think the impact of the way we do business, for example, integration of technology and media companies, is having on the social media and digital technology space? Do you think there is a reciprocal relationship where digital technology and social media democratizes us, but then big organizations like BT that are integrating and become even bigger are actually then having an impact on that in the reverse way?
I must admit, I'm not too sure what the question is. I'm not really clear on it. I mean, could you clarify? Could you ask the question again?
Is the way we do business, for example, integration of big companies taking over spaces that they aren't traditionally used to? So, for example, BT going into media and sport, is that going to change the way that digital technology and social media work because we've got major players impacting how those. Oh, sorry, I can't get the words out.
Yeah.
How we consume that.
So are you talking, is your question specifically about, so BT entering into the TV market, BT Sport, how that's going to change the dynamics?
Not just BT, actually. There are so many organisations that are looking at not just technology, but now looking at content and now looking at the sports space.
Sure. I mean, I'll certainly comment about BT, and then maybe some of my colleagues can, pass comments as well. I mean, I think BT Sport and BT in that entry into the sort of the telly space has been really, really interesting, and I've been fortunate enough to hear a couple of people quite recently speak about what happened and how much money they had to spend. It was actually over there in a meeting last week. So from a BT perspective, they entered into the sports telly arena purely to protect and grow their broadband business, as you know. So for them, it was very much how do they stop their business from declining, so BT's core business had been in decline for at least 10 years. And, the strategy was very much, well, let's go rather big and go after all of these very prestigious football rights that only ITV and Sky previously had the commercial pockets for, and go in and get these rights and basically use that as a loss leader, if you will, because they're not charging customers at the moment to protect and grow their broadband business. So I think that's quite interesting, but I think that's quite a unique case because there are a huge amount of these large sports rights to go around. Other large players?
I've got some thoughts on that. I think other people from outside of sport coming into sport, whether they be technology or other areas, is a good thing or a bad thing depending on what side you're sitting on. If you're Sky with a billion quid left on your balance sheet and BT doubling what you paid for everything every single time until you run out of a billion quid on your balance sheet, it's a bad thing. I think if you're a smaller business in sport, such as our business, it's a great thing because 20 years worth of standard understanding about how the industry works has been turned on its head. Suddenly rights aren't something to necessarily build your business around, which makes it sort of very interesting. I think what is also going to be interesting as it sort of plays out over the next sort of 5 years or so is around sport was the last bastion of live and the last thing that was absolutely sacrosanct about TV. It's like you could never replace that sort of first ad spot on the ITV break. And I think that's is already being challenged. I think that's going to continue to be eroded and challenged. I think TV is still going to be around for a long time, but I think that the fact that sport can only be consumed live on TV is going to definitely change in the next few years. And you look at what people are doing, whether it be on sort of Xbox, I think has got a fantastic opportunity, or you look at what's happening on YouTube, the fact that Larry Page and Eric Schmidt were having a sort of a chat with the guys at the NFL and those sorts of things. It's live sports are going to be on YouTube or other platforms within sort of 5 years or so. And 5 years ago, you'd have said they couldn't do that because they didn't have the distribution, they didn't have the production capability. But they have distribution now with little Chromecast for $30 in the back of your TV. That is all going to start the distribution outlets are going to start to grow. And so therefore, I think rights are going to be much more attractive to lots of different people. But then at the same time, it's a winner-takes-all game, and somebody will always turn up with more money than you at some point, unless you're Google, because you're going to have all the money. So it just makes it really, really interesting. But the great thing about Google is that they're very big, and so they can only do a few things. So you look at all of the businesses that have come out of Google, where there are 2 or 3 guys who have spotted a little corner that Google can't execute on, and that's where big industries can grow from there. So I think it's a good thing, depending on whether you're defending it or whether you're trying to smack it down.
Yeah, I think from the stats, Ofcom do an annual communication study, which is a great piece of work, comes out every autumn, and looks across the whole UK market and people's viewing habits. For 2012 as a whole, not just the Olympics, 35% of drama is time shifted on television. I'm sure that figure was higher for 2013, and only 8% of sport. And so sport is the one part of the big media mix that remains a constant as an event or events that you want to see live. And by and large, I think you want to see them on the biggest screen you can in the most comfortable place you can get to, notwithstanding that you might have to travel, work, or do something else. That doesn't mean, you're quite right, it doesn't mean that you couldn't have that distributed to you by some different means. It doesn't have to be through a standard TV signal or a cable. It could well be through Wi-Fi and a Chromecast. And I've certainly, if anyone's watched Netflix through a PlayStation, it's a perfect resolution, comes up very quick, compression's superb. So the big battle is in that for the customer is around who's going to distribute what to whom and why. But the value of the rights at the center of that will only continue to escalate. A lot of the challenge comes with where television networks have still a lot of sort of almost vestigial power, if you like, is that they have sales networks and they can cross-sell aggressively. They have great relationships with media agencies, and it takes a long time for those habits to shift and change. So they may not necessarily have the most natural capture of audience, but as long as they can still sell their product, as long as they can still get advertisers to buy their airtime, and they'll be in a strong position to do that. And a lot of networks use. NBC has now bought the Olympics through to 2030, and who knows what the consumer landscape looks at that point. But they clearly consider that the rights themselves, distributed through whatever platform, are valuable enough that it's worth buying them that far ahead, and they'll find a way of both distributing them and selling against them for that period of time.
And on that note, I would like to thank everybody for coming to Behaviour's Business Week tonight, and if we can thank once more our panelists and speakers.
Hi. Okay, I'll only be a few minutes. I think we're all tired. And first, I'd like to extend my thanks to the keynote speaker and to the panelists for the views on digital social media and the challenges, both in terms of the technology and more so in terms of organizational challenges that it implies. As a final note, I'd like to take a very few minutes to introduce you to the Department of Computer Science at Birkbeck. First of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Professor Levine, and I'm the current head of department. We're part of the BEI School, Business, Economics, and Informatics. The department has a long-standing heritage. I won't repeat what was said before, but just briefly, it was established in 1957. So the department is actually one of the oldest computer science departments in the UK. The lecture is named after Andrew Booth, as Philip mentioned, who worked in the department in its early years and built one of the first commercial computers in the world. So that was, I guess, one of the first synergies in computing between industry and academia, and it's something that's very important to us. He was also a pioneer of natural language translation, which is obviously quite important in computing. There's lots of data mining activities such as sentiment mining, natural language understanding that actually help a lot of the social media, as I don't know if you follow the tech news, but companies like Facebook, Microsoft, Google, and so on, they've spent billions of pounds buying these technologies, which actually they believe will help them with their platforms. Taking the history ahead, to the 1980s, when I was doing my PhD at Birkbeck, the department established itself as a world player in the database management area, which again is underlying information, which we believe is important till today. I'll mention the TriStop group under the leadership of Professor King developed the triple store, which can be viewed as the precursor of the semantic web, which, as we know, is one of the underlying technologies which has fueled all the advances that people are building on. Also mentioned the theoretical side, under the guidance of Professor George Louisu, we contributed to relational database theory, which is the central pillar of database management till today and will probably be for many years to come. I'm actually proud of being Professor Louisa's student, and we still collaborate to this day, just to mention that, which has been quite a while. It is worth mentioning, I think the 4 professors in the department did their PhD in Birkbeck, so we all felt that it was a place that we could come back and fulfill our research goals as well as teaching students in the field of computer science. Building on this heritage, information management is still central to our research agenda. We have made significant contributions in the areas of semantic web, data mining, web technologies, and mobile computing, to name a few. The synergy between computational intelligence and information management has become central to our research agenda, as well as cutting-edge interdisciplinary research in the London Knowledge Lab, which is based in the department. Now just a bit about the teaching. As you know, Birkbeck University of London is the leading provider in London of part-time and full-time evening courses. The department provides a wide range of degrees from foundation to BSc, MSc and PhD. Many of our students are already working in the IT industry, and this mix contributes to the success of the department and the school. Please visit our website. Do not hesitate to contact us if you wish to gain more information about the department and what it can do for you. Thank you very much for attending, and I hope you enjoy the rest of our business week, which has a lot to offer. Thank you.